My name is Yeong Kim, and I'm a faculty member in the Human Development Family Sciences program at the University of Texas at Austin. So, if you're very lucky, you may have more than one PhD program offer. And if you do, then there are several things to think about. One of the most important is funding. Second is location, and third is culture. So you want to think about funding, location, and culture when considering multiple offers. So PhD programs typically are going to be about 5 years. And depending on the program, some programs will be as short as 4, some could be a little longer and go 6. And there's also different types of funding. One is you will get a fellowship offer where you may be getting a fellowship, maybe possibly just the first year rather than all 5 years or 6 years of the program, just to get you into their program. Other programs may be offering you a combination of like teaching assistantship, research assistantship, a fellowship. So the most important thing is making sure that you're going to get a multi-year funding package. And the other thing sometimes students overlook is summer funding. Because the academic year is 9 months, students sometimes forgo the idea that, oh, I get this stipend, but it's only for 9 months. Is what's going to happen during the summer. So the best programs are going to be offering you multi-year packages where you are going to be getting paid a monthly stipend to go to school. And the stipend, they will guarantee it for 12 months rather than the 9 months of the academic year so that you have summer coverage. And many programs will also guarantee some sort of fellowship as part of that 5-year package. But the default mode for most packages are going to be making sure you have at least a teaching assistantship. So a teaching assistantship will typically be about 20 hours a week. And that teaching assistantship, you may be a TA for 1 or 2 classes. And the great benefit of being a teaching assistant is that not only do you get a monthly stipend, you will also get health insurance as part of being a teaching assistant. And also you will get tuition benefits. So if you're going, for example, at a university where you're an out-of-state or international student, being a teaching assistant, for example, at some universities can allow you to qualify for in-state tuition. But in some cases, it can even pay for your tuition. And so that's the kind of funding package you would be wanting to look for, because the funding package is going to be important because, you will be, when you're not teaching or being a research assistant, then you have to focus on getting your publications and focusing on your research. And so it's important to make sure you have a multi-year funding package. And then if you're on a fellowship, you don't have work obligations. That's your time to develop your research. And then being a graduate research assistant means you're working about 20 hours a week on a faculty member who's funding you to do research on their project. So maybe they may have a large Research 1, RO1 kind of grant where you have to work as a research assistant. So you want to look for a multi-year funding package. And then, of course, the location is very important. So if you are someone, for example, who grew up in a warm climate, let's say you grew up in California, it may be challenging to go to the East Coast where, you don't know how to deal with the snow or whatnot. So you want to think about location. And if you're very family oriented, you may also need to think about location in terms of how far it is from your family and how that will impact your ability to be a successful graduate student if you're going to be very far away from family and you're very family oriented. But honestly, one of the most important thing also is the culture. So if you go and you think the style of the faculty member is a good fit for you, then of course, that would be good. But at the same time, you're not only working with the faculty member you chose, but you're also going to be joining the department. You're also going to be joining the research lab with the other graduate students that are in the program. So you want to think about, is that culture also a good fit, not only with the faculty member, but the culture in terms of the departmental culture and also culture in terms of the research lab, but also just the location in terms of the city that that you're going to be living in. If you grew up in a small farm town, for example, it may be pretty shocking to go to a big city school in the middle of New York, and you may not be a good fit for you because you're not, you being in a hustle and bustle of a big city may not be a good fit with what you're interested in or how your lifestyle. But at the same time, it could be a good time to make a change. So that's something to think about. So funding, location, and culture would be considered important factors to consider in selecting a PhD program offer. To know which program is the right fit for you, if you happen to be lucky enough to have multiple PhD program offers, is, if at all possible, requesting a campus visit. So for students who are admitted to a program, for example, some programs will be offering some sort of funding package where you can come and visit to try it out and see what it's going to be like to be a student on that specific campus. Some students, I recognize, may not have the resources to travel to see if they think it would be a good fit. But if at all possible, doing a campus visit, seeing if you think it could be a good fit, with a culture that you may be immersed in, that would be one of the best ways to tell if that program is the right fit for me. But that's also only after you have decided that the funding package that's being offered is going to be a fit. So a lot of students ask me whether after they get into a PhD program, they'll say, oh, I didn't get into my dream school, but I feel like I want to, not go and maybe try again next year. I say, it is so hard to get into a PhD program. A typical PhD program, like in our program, it's the number of applicants, there's so many relative to the number of spots that are open. The admissions rate can be anywhere from less than 1% for some clinical psychology programs to maybe 5 or 10%. So just getting a spot itself in a top research-oriented university PhD program is so hard. If you think doing the PhD is the right path for you, I strongly recommend just going to one of the schools that you've been admitted to rather than waiting a year. Unless taking that year off or taking that gap year would be very helpful for you in figuring out whether the PhD is the right path. But if you think PhD is the right path, and if you think that school is the right fit, at least for now, even if it may not be your dream school, I strongly recommend just taking it, given how competitive it is. And given the uncertainty with federal funding right now, just because you got admitted this year or didn't get admitted next year doesn't mean you will be admitted again the next year you apply. So I say if getting the PhD is your dream and you do have a good enough offer, I recommend just going and seeing and doing the best you can. And of course, if you get there and if it's not a good fit once you get there, then of course you need to consider reapplying. But I recommend strongly just going, even if it's not your dream school, and if it's a good enough fit, I recommend just going to that PhD program.